Hey guys, Zane here with another one-take review, and today I wanted to talk about the Devourment album Obscene Majesty. Obscene Majesty is arguably one of, if not the most well-regarded album from Texas slam death metal band Devourment. One could even say that this album, a record that came over 20 years after their formation in 1995, was the record that finally put Devourment on the proper death metal map. The main claim to fame that Obscene Majesty has here is the fact that many consider it to be one of the heaviest sounding albums ever recorded. While the expectedly vicious and graphically detailed lyrics that would otherwise get Devourment put on some sort of government watch list if they played literally any other genre of music is definitely something that has a hand in that heaviness, this is still one of the most musically dense records that I've ever listened to. Obscene Majesty opens up with a sort of wave of white noise that would be seemingly destructively ambient in quite literally any other setting, and here it feels like a lightweight moment and a sort of break before the actual action kicks in, which is the opposite effect that it would have on most other similar records, as right after that moment the album begins to kick in with these crushing guitar riffs and non-stop bass drums that end up defining the rest of the album and listening experience from that point moving forward. No matter how much enjoyment anybody gets out of actually listening to Obscene Majesty, whether it be myself, you who are watching this, there's one take that I think we should all have, which is that Devourment know how to make one hell of a heavy album. That being said, unfortunately that heaviness ends up working against the album rather than for it. Obscene Majesty can often feel directionless with sonic landscapes that are at times one note at best, and D. Braxton Henry's production certainly doesn't do any favors as it does adopt a sort of wall of sound style that negatively impacts the overall quality and enjoyability of the album as a whole. This constant density on Obscene Majesty causes the guitar riffs to lose their prominence, the vocal work to be layered under layer under layer under layer, and the bass work to be virtually non-existent, which I suppose isn't necessarily the most uncommon thing in the world in the history of metal, cough cough and justice for all, but it still is slightly disheartening to hear on what otherwise could have been an impressively heavy but technical album. While I do genuinely love the idea of an album as heavy and unrelenting as Obscene Majesty, Devourment's work here, primarily because of the production, is just buried in waves of their own noise, and they end up overshadowing themselves with a sort of taste in my mouth that is flavorless yet aggressive. Generally speaking, this is, in that particular aspect, a disappointingly ineffective listening. The most frustrating part about that, though, is that the actual compositions themselves are pretty solid overall. While there's nothing here that will blow you away musically in the way that certain other slam death metal projects would, like Catalepsy or even Wormhole, I still do think that Obscene Majesty has some solid musicianship put behind it. Everything here feels very human and natural in nature, and drummer Brad Fincher in particular is a highlight of this record. I really do think he's a fantastic drummer, and in an age where death metal grows increasingly reliant on pre-programmed drumming and droning blast beats that grow decreasingly interesting every year, I think that the world needs more drummers like Brad Fincher. It is a genuine shame that all of this is overshadowed by this wall of sound direction on Obscene Majesty, as Devourment could have really used this record as an opportunity to deliver a once-in-a-lifetime career-defining performance, which I think, if you were to strip away that production, is possibly here. Instead, the band at best managed to give hints at what could have been and generally get drowned out by their own loudness and the record's murky production. So overall, Obscene Majesty really had an opportunity to be a major milestone in heaviness in death metal. It really, truly did. While it certainly does kick up the amps a couple of notches more than the majority of their peers, Devourment end up being drowned out by their own loudness and a lack of half-decent production that ultimately makes this record feel lifeless, and Obscene Majesty is, in turn, a relatively unmemorable performance beyond the fact that it can blow out your earbuds. I mean, seriously, the first time that I actually sat down and listened to this album, I had my computer on full volume, and I was kind of worried that my headphones were about to get blown out, but thankfully they weren't. But that just goes to show how heavy this album is and how impressive it could have been. So I am going to give Obscene Majesty 3 stars out of 5. I debated giving it 2.5, but I will admit that I do believe that if you were to strip away this weak, thoughtless production, you would find strong performances, and I am genuinely impressed by a couple of small interludes or passages here or there throughout the track list, but overall I just remain entirely unimpressed and unenthused by the work delivered here, not because it's bad, but because it wasn't taken to the heights that it should have been. So again, Obscene Majesty by Devourment, 3 stars out of 5. And with that being said, that's the end of this review, and I'll see you guys in the next one.